there, listeners. Are you feeling the weight of the world? Well, you're not alone. The U.S. Surgeon General says nearly 50% of parents are overwhelmed by stress. And guess what? It's affecting us all. Just last year, we heard about an epidemic of loneliness hitting half our population, especially young adults. But there's hope. I'm Scarlett Lewis, founder of the Choose Love movement. We're dedicated to your safety, health, and well-being with proactive mental health strategies. Imagine a life where stress and loneliness are replaced by joy and connection. We've already reached millions with essential life skills to prevent violence, substance abuse, and mental illness. Want to join this life-changing movement? It's easy. Visit chooselovemovement.org today. Become a member, spread the word, and access our free resources. Together, we can create a loving, supportive community. Remember, all the nurturing, healing love you give comes back to you tenfold. Thank you for choosing love.
I choose love. I choose love. Hey, hey. Hey, hey. Hey, hey. Oh.
The Choose Love movement offers no-cost solutions that keep our kids safe, providing them with the skills and tools they need to flourish. Join us in our mission to create the world we want to live in, one that's connected and compassionate. Check us out at chooselovemovement.org. Together, we can choose love.
Hey, everybody. My name is Scarlett Lewis. Welcome to the Choose Love podcast. Today, I have a very special guest. Her name is Donna Marston, who is the author of Healing Without Shame Journal, Just for Today, Peeling the Onion, and Sharing Without Shame. Donna is a certified recovery support worker, a substance abuse treatment and recovery facilitator, serving on the Governor's Commission on Alcohol and Drug Abuse, on the Recovery Task Force. She is a NAMI-trained parent family support facilitator, New Hampshire State Advocate, and 2015 Recovery Provider of the Year. She is also the host of the Sharing Without Shame podcast that I've been on, and so much more. Welcome, Donna.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I mean, you and I have something in common that we also have with a lot of listeners. One, our lives have been touched by addiction. And I was saying to you earlier, I don't know anybody whose life has not been touched by addiction. If not personally, then through their family or close friends. I mean, we are just only a few people away from it, and it's a real struggle. And so today we're going to have a conversation. I think the best way to learn is through somebody that has gone through the fire and lived it and really struggled through it to learn lessons and grow personally and be able to find meaning in that struggle, as well as a purpose. And that describes you. Do you want to share your story?
Yeah. So basically what once was my mess, I made it my message, but, going back to when my son was new into his teenage years, I started to see a change in him, didn't know what was going on. And, would ask questions.
How old was he?
When when he really started to change was 15. But, teenage kids, they're going through a lot emotionally, they're hormonally. It's not unusual that they start to change, their friends start to change. So there's all that. But my gut was just stirring that something's wrong, and I didn't know what it was.
What were the changes you were noticing?
He was irritable, restless, and discontent. And, would go up in his room. We were very close. He wasn't engaging as much. He was starting to look a little disheveled as as the teenage years moved forward.
And I guess parents could say, well, that's just being a
That's
teenager.
right. Yeah, that's the growing pains of being a teenager. Yeah. And so at 18 he was arrested. I asked, "Are you doing drugs?" "Oh no, you're crazy." And so who wants to believe that your child's an active addiction? And so fast forward at the age of 20, I couldn't, he was supposed to be home, took like a day or two before he came home. He came in, I said, "Give me the keys to the car and what drug are you on?" And he started to cry and he said oxys. And that was when it took off. And so from 20 to 25, I was in the fetal position for probably 3 of those years because his addiction was really full force. And
What does that look like?
messy, awful, scary. I was in the fetal position for the first 6 months. I was in bed when he told me that he had an addiction problem.
So in bed with depression?
And my head was my hell. That what did I do wrong? Did I love him enough? Did I treat him differently than his brother? What's going on here? And that went on for 6 months. And then finally, I had a day where I was just tooling around the house, just sitting in my pain. And a voice came and like, this, you didn't do this. This isn't your fault. And I realized like I didn't inject heroin into his veins. I didn't crush oxy so he could snort them. But I also realized in that pivotal moment, I had a secret. Because this is back in the 1990s, early 2000s. You didn't talk about it back then. And so I realized like, I have a secret and I just can't tell anybody. So I kept my secret, which makes us very sick as parents. But during those years, I did so much wrong because I loved him. I love him so much. I wanted everything to be fine and I wanted him to be well. So I became the unhealthy helper, what some people call the enabler, but I don't like that language because they're shaming and blaming us for loving our children. And we're going to do everything we can to help
Mm.
our child. Whether it's right or wrong, we all have to do what we have to do. There's so much that goes into this. And so what I learned
Well,
looking
learning from mistakes is one thing that we've all done.
right is that I was walking on eggshells while I was allowing him to be comfortable in his addiction because he lived at home.
Mm.
I didn't want to do or say anything because maybe he'll go get high if I say or do the wrong thing. So I was always mindful of that, which makes you a little crazy. And I'd pay off dealers. One time he told me that he needed $900 because they were going to beat him up so bad they were either going to put him in the hospital or kill him. And as a parent, what do you do? What's your child's life worth? So, I gave him the 900, but I had a plan, because he worked at this place. I said, have this guy come to your work and you do it in front of the cameras and you give him the money and you count out exactly, the $100 bills. And then we have it. In his recovery, he since told me that was a lie, that he did that to get money out of me. He needed to pay somebody off. I think it was like $300 or $400 and the rest was to buy drugs. So it's stuff like that, that I didn't grow up around it, so I had no knowledge of what I was dealing with. Although I grew up in the 60s and 70s where sex, drugs, and rock and roll, so I thought, I'll know. I had not a clue. Yeah, so that that I lost myself in my son's addiction. He became my drug of choice, and
Interesting. So
I was
interesting.
addicted to
Why
saving
do you
him.
say that? My drug of choice was my son.
Because I was addicted to saving him from himself, from the drugs, from everything that was wrong that was going on in his life. And I'm his mother, and that's my job, is to save and rescue my child. and love him into recovery. And I learned the hard way that I couldn't love him into recovery. And he needed to do his recovery his way, or his addiction his way. And so there was a lot that I learned. There was a lot that I did wrong, and there was a lot of suffering, emotional suffering. I mean, I became financially and emotionally bankrupt because I'm going through money, putting him in rehabs, paying off drug dealers, paying off his debt. If he didn't make his car payment, paying it, to the point where we almost lost our home. You know, it, I did some awful things that I'm, not proud of. However, if
Well, you
I
were in survival mode, I'll say that, and you were able to survive.
fight or flight,
Yeah, for sure.
24/7, 24/7,
Right. We're
not
not
knowing that.
operating out of our prefrontal cortex when, that's where we want to be, but a lot of people are just simply reacting
I was going
out of fear.
through my heart and fear. And so, yeah, so when you think you can control somebody else, your child, is so fear-based that you're kind of frantic. And when, there was a time near the end where he had this awful stench and he was just a mess. He was just looked awful. And one of his friends said, "Oh, that's the heroin oozing out of his pores. That's what you're smelling." He was using so much.
Oh my God.
And it was just awful. And so 2 years before he found his recovery, somebody told me to read this book, and I couldn't. I was done with self-help books. But she said, "Okay, look at page," I think it was 134. And on that was a an emotional scale, 1 to 22. I was number 22. I was full of despair. I was depressed. I wasn't living my life. And it hit me like a 2 by 4. Like, dear God, how did I get so sick, emotionally sick? How did I unknowingly learn to live in dysfunction when I'm not, a typical dysfunctional person?
I'm
Um,
not even the addict, right?
yeah,
They're probably thinking.
well, but I was, because I was addicted to him.
Hmm.
I was addicted to rescuing him and fixing him because I'm his mother. Get out of the way, let me do it, honey, because I can do it better than you, when I didn't know what I was dealing with.
Hmm.
So when I saw that, I knew I needed to do something, because what I was doing didn't feel good. And I realized I wasn't emotionally available to anybody who was healthy in my life. And so I started, baby steps of doing some self-care. I was lacking taking care of myself or anybody healthy around me. If
What, you were emotionally unavailable because of shame?
I was emotionally unavailable because I was hyper focused on him and his addiction. Yes, I didn't want to go out because I felt shame. I have a son who's addicted to drugs that's living in my home. And he's, had a little bit of a reputation in our small little town in New Hampshire, and that's, basically we lose our hopes and dreams for our children when they're sick and suffering.
Hmm.
So there's a part of that we lose ourselves while we're losing them. And sometimes I think we have to go through this messy piece in order to get to a point where I've hit my enough. I need to start working on me. I need to get myself well and learn how to deal with this, so that we can have a healthier relationship even when he's unhealthy, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, yes. And so what are some of the things? So this is the start of kind of your recovery was in self-care. And what were some of the things that you did?
So I went to Codependence Anonymous, and I learned a lot. I read a lot of Melody Beattie books. They were good. I went and had some Reiki, and it was the first time I felt some lightness in my heart, and I laughed. I hadn't remembered laughing in a long, long, long time. And so that felt so good that I wanted more. So I sought out a Reiki master, and then I studied, and then I became a Shambhali Reiki master. So I went on the spiritual journey and learned to meditate. I did journaling. I would write, do a lot of writing, and just kind of put it out there. I got it out of me and put it on paper, whether it was through artwork or through words.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's powerful. And there's research behind that working and being effective. So,
Hmm.
so you're feeling better about yourself, and now you're into this advocacy work. And we were talking the other day, and you said something that was shocking. So I'm just going to say it now because it really hit me that I was talking about the cell phone and how we're pretty much all addicted to this. I call it a crack pipe. Um,
Oh,
the dopamine and everything. Well, I mean,
yeah,
in
yeah,
a different kind.
yeah.
Um, and there's some different views on whether marijuana is a gateway drug. And you said, well, sugar is a gateway drug. Wow. So can you
Mhm.
talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and that's new to me. I was, I forget where I heard it. I was watching some documentary. That's what it was. I was watching a documentary on sugar, and they talked about that is a gateway to for some people. And I can tell you, I know people in recovery that when they were little kids, they would hide a candy bar, anything sweet, they would hide it. So when they went to bed at night and nobody was looking, they could feed that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So
Yeah.
stealing and hiding, yeah, are sometimes signs at a very early age that parents can watch for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
those gateway things that then can snowball
Yep.
into full-blown addiction.
Yep.
So your son has had tremendous success.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about how, I think he's 30 years old now, and he has,
42.
okay, 42, and he has a family, and he's
Yes.
fully recovered for how many years?
It will be, well, oh, 08. So what's that? 17, 18 years?
Okay.
Something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Okay. That's amazing. So how did that happen?
A little bit at a time. He was in and out of treatment, and 9 times out of 10, he would go to treatment to get me off his back.
Hmm.
Figured, well, once I go, I'll start going back, and it will take her about a month to 2 months to figure it out. And that's what would happen. Because for him, I think this is an important fact for people to understand. Whether your kids, alcohol's a drug. A lot of people don't understand that, but it is a drug. It's highly addictive. And for my son, if one of his treatments, the day he left, he went out with some people from treatment. They all graduated, and they had drinks. For my son, even though alcohol wasn't his first choice, it weakens his senses. Within, it could be weeks to a month or maybe 2 months, he's back to shooting up.
Hmm.
And that could kill him because his body's not used to that.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I lost my train of thought on that. Sorry.
No, it's true. And it's interesting that I have seen people trade one addiction for another. They've been in recovery and they don't do their drug of choice, but when you're with them, they overdo something else. And
Exercise,
yeah, right. Anything.
coffee.
Yeah. Yeah. Either not good for you, or even, good for you in relativity. But yeah, and it's pretty interesting to see.
Well, when my son was newly sober, he would go to Dunkin' Donuts and get 3 large iced coffees, 7 sugars, 7 creams, and he couldn't figure out why he was gaining weight. But for some reason, when people are in early recovery, they crave the sugar.
Hmm.
Go back to when they're little kids and they're stealing the sugar.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there's something, especially with alcohol. You know, if you ever go to a AA or NA meeting, people are popping candy. They're chewing on gum. They're doing something that has something sweet
Mm-hmm.
to it. So it
Interesting.
makes sense that the sugar could be the gateway for
I know,
some, not all.
yeah, and I know a lot of people that you can't do it alone. You need help. And
You need
so
support.
what kind of help should people seek? I mean, I'm thinking about our audience and their educators and parents, and you may know somebody that is in addiction, and you may have it in your home. And so how do you know if you're being what do you call it? Not
Unhealthy helper.
an unhealthy helper. Like, what are the signs of that?
Paying off drug dealers, doing anything for your loved one that they could and should do for themselves,
Doing anything for your loved one that they could and should do for themselves. Unhealthy enabling. Um,
especially 18-year and older. You know, I mean, sometimes it's tougher with the younger kids, you know, but yeah, I mean, I was paying his way. I have parents that were going on drug deals and they were buying, let their kids buy the drugs, they're adult teen, these are 18 and older, and coming back to the house and using. And I have a couple of parents that belong to my support group that found their kids blue in the morning. How do you live with that? You know, I mean, you think you're doing something helpful because you think they're safer at home doing drugs
right,
than out someplace else.
right.
You're never safe anywhere doing drugs because you
You're never
never
safe anywhere,
know.
especially now because you don't know if there's fentanyl in them. And then
Right.
what do you say, if a child says to you, "Hey mom, um, I need you to I need you to uh buy me like take me to a certain place and buy a drug because or get me a medical marijuana card because if you don't get me a medical marijuana card, say for my anxiety, I'm going to buy it anyway on the street and I don't know if it's laced, so you need to go do this for me." And like that kind of manipulation I've heard
Mm-hmm.
from friends. And so what do you say to parents that's a lot of pressure, right? To stand up to something like that.
Yeah. And it's hard because, you know, I kind of feel like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You know, so there's ways you can do this, and a lot of parents do not like when I say this. But you could there's Never Use Alone, the an organization that if your child's going to use, they call this number and they're getting high on this with, and these people are listening and they have people on call. So if you're not answering them in so many minutes, they send an ambulance to you. The other thing is you can get test strips for fentanyl and you could give those to your child. If this is what you're going to do, here's test strips, test it before you use it. Because, and it, and that's a way that you're supporting them, that hopefully if you're saying, if you can do this, maybe they won't want to do it anymore. Because it's not that you're condoning it, but you're giving them safety tools in hopes that they'll stay alive. Does that make sense?
I
I
mean,
mean,
it
hard
is
to hear.
here. It's hard to hear that. And yeah,
I
I
know.
yeah, I mean,
And
I lived with somebody with an addiction and a bipolar that would not stay on their medication, and I eventually had to remove them because it was not a good situation. and
and then
and
there's that too. You can do
yeah,
that too.
yeah, and that's hard. It was not my child, so it was easier. Not, it wasn't easy, but it wasn't my child either, and I can't imagine having to make that decision. And I watched another really dear friend go through addiction with her son, and I remember having conversations with her. She did so much for him, recovery. She was constantly involved in his life, and he was on and off drugs, and he eventually died, unfortunately, of an accidental overdose. Um, and I didn't know what the right thing to do was, and she didn't either. But she also, I know she didn't say this, but she didn't want to have any regrets as a
Mm-hmm.
parent. And
Yeah, that's huge.
yeah, that's huge. So how do you manage? You're saying with no regrets, you would, if a child's going to use, are you going to let them stay in the house and use under your roof by giving, like, sitting with them? Or I mean, I can't imagine sitting with my child and watching them use,
Oh.
but giving them test strips, or what, what are the boundaries?
I, you know, I think it's different for everybody. So what worked for me may not work for anybody else. For me, would I have done all that? I don't know. It wasn't available when my son was using. So I would see him at times in the family room, and he's, his head's hanging, he's drooling in the middle of the day. I'm like, what are you doing? Get up and go do something, go get active, go get a job, do something. And it'd be like, I'm exhausted. And so if you don't know what you're dealing with when you see that, you go, oh, okay, maybe, he wasn't a good sleeper. He'd be up all hours of the night. So I could, denial is a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's really easy to deny any of it, okay,
Mm-hmm.
because you want to believe what your children are saying. And so when you see it, your gut stirs, and all I can tell you is listen to your gut. There's no right or wrong way. We all have to find what works for us. For me, I did everything possible. I turned myself into a human pretzel trying to save and rescue my son from his addiction. And
Mm-hmm.
what happened is I got sicker and sicker and sicker. And then the night that when everything changed, my son, we had a bad day, and my husband and I on Saturday nights would go out with date night since the boys were little, just so we needed to make our marriage important and make it about us. One night a week, that was all. And so my son had gotten high and he came home, and I said, "You want to come out to dinner?" And he had been missing for 8 hours. And I went upstairs, and I told my husband that our son was going to come with us. He goes, "I'm not sitting across the table from him, and he's high, and I'm done." He goes, I just can't do this with you anymore." He goes, you have to figure this out, Donna, because this just isn't working anymore. And as I'm walking down the stairs
You
calling,
have to figure it out
well, not, in other words, he was not going to participate
the way that you were
the
in the
way I
addiction.
wanted and needed him to.
Yeah. Okay.
And so as I'm walking down the stairs, I'm thinking, calling him all kinds of names. And when I got to the end of the stairs, my son was standing there, and like clarity hit. And I said, you know what? Here's a phone number. They have a bed. You can get help. We love you, but we can't participate in this anymore, but we'll support you in your recovery. I hope you make the right decision. And my husband and I left. Later that night, he called and said, I made arrangements to go to treatment tomorrow. 8 years later, he was speaking for me, and I found out that night he attempted suicide. There were a lot of drugs in my house, and I didn't know it. And
Like what? Oh, you mean his drugs?
and the rafters in the basement, outside, he'd dig holes and put baggies in the holes. I mean, they're very creative. And he tried to commit suicide that night. So I would have found my son with a note on Mother's Day. But by the grace of God, he woke up that morning and knew he needed to go to treatment. And so he went, again, thinking, I'm just going to go through the motions. I'll get out. She won't figure it out for a while. Something changed. He saw a big book lying around. He opened it. And that night, he looked at Peter, who did drugs, and his new the person who was newly sober, they had a conversation. I don't know what it was. I didn't ask. It's not my business. And he said something, he felt a negative entity leave his body that night, and he knew he was going to be okay.
Wow. I
So,
mean, it sounds like he was introduced to God, frankly.
yeah, I believe he had a spiritual awakening. Yeah.
And it sounds like it for sure. And
Hmm.
yeah, I totally believe that. That's
Hmm.
amazing. And so he's been on in recovery since then.
Hmm.
That's incredible.
May 11th, 2008, to be exact.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it was
So
Mother's Day. And here's the thing, like family can be really lousy to us. And I called my brother and I said, listen, I can't come home for Mother's Day for mom today because I live in a different state. And I said, this is what's going on. And emotionally, I'm a mess.
Strength that we can rise above. I choose love.
Hey there, listeners. Are you feeling the weight of the world? Well, you're not alone. The U.S. Surgeon General says nearly 50% of parents are overwhelmed by stress. And guess what? It's affecting us all. Just last year, we heard about an epidemic of loneliness hitting half our population, especially young adults. But there's hope. I'm Scarlett Lewis, founder of the Choose Love movement. We're dedicated to your safety, health, and well-being with proactive mental health strategies. Imagine a life where stress and loneliness are replaced by joy and connection. We've already reached millions with essential life skills to prevent violence, substance abuse, and mental illness. Want to join this life-changing movement? It's easy. Visit chooselovemovement.org today. Become a member, spread the word, and access our free resources. Together, we can create a loving, supportive community. Remember, all the nurturing, healing love you give comes back to you tenfold. Thank you for choosing love.
I choose love. I choose love.
And he said some really lousy things to me. And I don't want to repeat it because, like I will repeat it. That's a great effing Mother's Day gift. And had I been still emotionally ill, I would have said, yeah, you're right. I would have gone into victim mode, but I
mhm,
straightened him out and I said, it's a beautiful gift. My son chose to save his life today. And so I'm grateful.
mm,
You
yeah.
go do you. I'm gonna go do me.
But he was saying that out of love for you, out of
Yeah.
defensiveness, out of anger at seeing you being hurt, knowing that it was Mother's Day. I mean, he was saying that as love, and you internalized that, and you understood that as criticism of your son, which made you angry. Uh,
Yeah.
but in actuality, really, he meant that out of love for you. It's kind of interesting when we're in victim mode anyway, how we translate things that that our family does.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Yeah, because my brother and I have a wonderful relationship. And everybody says stuff sometimes it comes out not the way you mean it, but
And it
and
depends
I
on what
was
you're going through when you receive it. And yeah, and it's hard to forgive, hardest to forgive our family, those
yeah.
people who aren't supposed to hurt you.
Yeah. And a lot of people have asked me, like with my son, did he ever say sorry? How did you forgive that? And it's like I never felt like I had to forgive him. I loved him unconditionally.
Hmm.
That's all it was.
Hmm. That's a parent's love for their child, right? Unconditional love. Doesn't matter what they do, you still love them.
Yeah. I
And I
didn't want
think,
anything in return. I just wanted
yeah,
him to be well.
something that you said resonated with me that night before Mother's Day when you said, "We love you." And I think that should be the first thing always that you say to any child, even, even those not in addiction, but having other issues. I love you. I love you. I see you. I see the best version of you and know that it's in there. and you're just not making the right choices. And hopefully they know that they have a choice, which is what, Choose Love teaches, that we actually have.
Yeah. And even when you're not doing the best you could be doing, I still love you.
Yes.
And I
Yes. Even
want
when you
better
make
for you.
mistakes, even if you are an addict, of course, the love
Mhm.
never goes away.
Because here's the thing, addiction is about disconnect. They don't typically love themselves. It could be trauma. It could be they've been on a medication way too long and it changed the brain chemistry. There's a lot of different reasons. They saw something happened to them. There's so many reasons why people self-medicate. It's not about the drink or the drug. It's the why. What are you putting a Band-Aid on? And if you can get to that, and have a conversation, or that they can even go within and figure that what that pain is that they're trying to mask so that they can move forward, living a healthy, happier life.
Because you can be born with a predisposition, but
Yes.
that gene does not have to be turned on. And that's the hope of the Choose Love movement, that we can give kids the skills, tools, and awarenesses that they need, that
Yeah.
gene wouldn't be turned on, because
Mhm.
they are managing their pain and they're growing through it, and they're seeing life as a challenge, and they're understanding that we're all just on our own hero's journey, and that pain has a purpose. It's there to help them grow, so that
Mhm.
they don't fear. I think a lot of the issue is the fear of the pain,
Yeah.
and and that fear then kind of makes you want to resist and avoid the pain or numb yourself. And I think, do you agree that that's kind of the
Yeah. And I think, the middle school years and teenage high school years, especially middle school years,
especially middle school years?
it is tough.
Yeah,
Kids are tough on each other.
yeah.
And you don't know what's going on in their home life, and they might come in and take it out on you because just it's misplaced anger, or misplaced trust or whatever. And there's just so much, and that can make or break a kid of which way they're going to go. It's what my son was bullied in 6th grade, and then we put him into another school, and for high school. And basically he had, again, in his sobriety, he had said, just wanted to fit in. Like, wow, there you go. How'd that work out?
So do you think the bullying was the catalyst?
I think,
Or the trying
no,
to
I
fit
think, I think there were signs prior to that.
in?
I
Mhm.
think it was a push, that pushed him into just wanted to fit in and not be bullied,
Mhm.
and
And that need to fit in is also an indicator of lack of self-esteem. When you can't be your authentic self, when you are going with the crowd to be accepted,
yeah,
then and that is rampant in our schools, but also as adults, this
yeah.
lack of loving ourselves and feeling like we're enough and feeling worthy. And when we don't feel like we're enough or worthy, I mean, that can lead to loneliness and,
Mhm.
unfortunately, trying to numb that pain.
Yeah, yeah. And he had friends, and he had some really good friends through those years. But what happened too was his best friend had an older brother, and I gave a neighborhood kid a ride who wasn't supposedly one of the cool kids. And the brother told my son, "You tell your mother not to give him a ride, because if she continues, we can't hang out with you." And I'm like, I'm not having a 14-year-old tell me who can get in my car and who
I'd be
can't.
going to have a conversation with that 14-year-old.
And yeah, so that was how it all started. And it was just, yeah, they're just tough years on a good day, I think.
So share some of the lessons that you've learned and give some advice to people that are listening in from what you've learned how they can keep their kids on the straight and narrow. It's as hard probably as it's ever been in today's world.
Well, yeah, because kids are vaping now and they're putting the oils that they get high with. There's just so much. And now you can order drugs online and they'll deliver them to your house. And there's pill mills, and what they're doing. Someone might. Well, I went to a thing with the DEA a few years ago. It was 40 parents who lost a child to an overdose, and some of them were from cannabis, and some of them were for vaping.
Wow, an overdose of cannabis?
Yeah, because the fentanyl was in it, and the daughter didn't know it.
Oh wow.
And so this gentleman from the DEA said, your children are victims of fraud because they're ordering these drugs online thinking they're getting a Xanax and they're getting pure fentanyl, but it's stamped to look just like the drug that you can get it, from your doctor. And so this young lady who was a valedictorian of her class took half because, she was a little nervous and her parents found her in the morning.
Oh my God.
So, if
No,
you're,
the problem with that, the problem, Donna, is that at one point they had the outcomes of the DARE programs that they teach in school, mandatory, all kids go through it.
my boys
And
went through it.
yeah, I'm not sure if the outcomes are still online or if they've updated them, but when I looked, which was about 15 years ago, it was zero. So 0% effectiveness. We know that the campaigns, remember in the 70s, frying the eggs, this is your brain on drugs. Those don't work. So up to this point, nothing's worked that we've done.
Right.
And so what do you feel would be effective? I mean, it's not effective to go and tell kids to scare them. The scare tactics aren't effective on most kids.
It's hard because we had conversations with our boys because I have a sister-in-law who passed, and she was, drugs, alcohol, and AIDS. And we brought the boys to the hospital and said, this is in your DNA. And this is what happens, drugs, alcohol, whatever, unsafe sex. This is it. This is
Wow.
your aunt. And we just want you to be very aware. I can't get any plainer than that, but
No, you can't.
it's
So
happening.
what is effective? What is effective? What can we be doing?
I think having conversations, a lot of parents are smoking cannabis at home in front of their kids. They're drinking in front of their kids because alcohol is acceptable. They're letting their kids have a sip of alcohol or a beer at 15, 16. And, here's something interesting. And I was telling you about this the other day that, like my son's born with it's in this tiger cub is what I call it, in his gut. And when he turns, 12 or 15 and he starts taking a drink, everything switches, right? When I grew up, they put a little bourbon or something on your gums if you were teething.
Mm-hmm.
If that baby has that in his DNA, are you waking that tiger up?
Wow.
And so here you have this laying dormant, and my son at 15 wants to fit in, and his friend says, hey, you want to smoke a joint? And he goes, yeah. And then it starts to wake up. He doesn't know this is in his body. Our kids think they're invincible, just like we all thought we were invincible when we were that age.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
And I think all you can do is have conversations. And if you're uncomfortable with this, let me know. I think the younger generations are not so much about the drugs and alcohol. They're doing more vaping and maybe some cannabis. And I would have test strips, fentanyl test strips, and have that conversation. I don't like what you're doing, but I want to keep you alive. And so I do have this available if you want to take it. I would, you can drug test. That's usually a war in itself. My son would, if you want to live here, you have to do a drug test. And so all I had to do was show it and he'd go ballistic. You're a rotten mother. How could you do this? And he would shame and blame me.
You know, is way off course.
Right. And then he'd call me like 2 hours later and go, "Hey, I took the drug test and it's in the bathroom and it's black." Well, come to find out, again, in his recovery, he was saving his urine.
Yeah.
And did you know you can buy clean urine online?
No.
Yeah. So you can pass drug tests. I know parents who've given their urine so their kids can pass a drug test who are like in a drug and alcohol program.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do I have the answer? No, I don't.
Yeah.
All I can say is have a conversation, but if you're gonna talk about it, walk it too. Don't have double
That's really
standards.
important. I think that's really, really important, is being authentic. And you know, I think about myself and having conversations with my boys, and I would have a glass of wine in my hand while I'm talking about drugs and alcohol. You know what I mean?
Don't
And
do it.
even being angry at a family member and watching, you know, how many drinks that they are having while I'm also ordering my second margarita. You know what I mean? And I think, and you know what I did? I stopped drinking, and not because I had a problem, but because that bothered me so much, that thought. And I was found myself so angry at a family member's drinking. And yet I, you know, drank too, and sometimes to excess. So I stopped. And the interesting thing that happened, which was pretty shocking to me, is that my anger went away
Mm,
completely. My judgment, it just went away, because I think I was living more in my authentic self. And also realizing that when it's an adult, there's nothing that you can do really. You can say, I love you, you know, and I want the best for you, and I don't want you to die. But other than that, you know, just it's amazing. You know, we are the culmination of our choices, and we continue to
mhm,
make them even when we become impaired, and maybe even to the point of unable to make good choices for ourselves. We're still the ones making choices, especially if the kids get over 18, right? So they are adults at that point. So really important to do all that
mm,
you can. And I remember going through this with my friend, with her son, trying to do everything that she could as a parent before
yeah.
he turned 18 and he became more independent.
Mm. It's really hard, and I too, to honor my son, I don't drink either. My husband and I, neither one of us drink, haven't had a drink probably like, well, 17, 18 years, something like that. And it's interesting, my phone stopped ringing. It makes people uncomfortable if you're sober.
They probably assume that you have a drinking problem. I mean, I've
Oh
been out
yeah,
since then with friends that I would of course have drinks with. And I have, and I've asked for a seltzer. And so I don't know what they really think about my decision, but it doesn't matter.
yeah.
You know, when you read about the impacts of alcohol and what it does to your brain and your body. And, you know, I've also interviewed on this podcast people that have fetal alcohol syndrome. 1 in 20 kids, by the way, has
Hmm.
fetal alcohol syndrome. So if you're a teacher listening, you have a student in your classroom that suffers from
Hmm.
this. And so we learned all about that. And if you want to, you can go back to the podcast and listen to those. It was actually 2 in a series because it was so fascinating. And of course, that's what Nicholas Cruz, the Parkland shooter, was diagnosed with, FASD.
Hmm.
And so, but you know, do you have any kind of last moment in our podcast, since we're unfortunately running out of time, advice that you could give parents that are struggling with kids that have addiction? I think number one, and I'll just answer for you, number one, and then you take the rest, is loving yourself. And I think that for any parent, loving yourself, taking care of yourself, having your kids see you take care and practice self-compassion, because then they learn to do that for themselves. I think that's the most important lesson that we learn in life, because in that way we get to, and we feel good enough about ourselves to be our authentic selves, not need to fit in, but also you're able to talk back to those voices in your head that say that you're not enough, that tell you you're a loser and that you shouldn't try things that we all have.
Yeah.
And so where would you go from there?
I think, it's being open and honest and building them up and, unconditional love. One of the things that when I work with parents, I always tell them to say, listen, I can't participate in your active addiction, but I'm here to support you in your recovery.
That's a good.
However, there's also ways of, having a healthier relationship when your loved one's unhealthy. There's things that you can do to still be with them, but not participate in the toxicity because they want to bring us into the chaos and the drama. It all comes down to love, and having, like you said, having the courage to take care of ourselves first, because what I realized too, when I was so sick and suffering, is that what if my son got well and I continued to be toxic to his recovery? I put my roller skates on and I started doing really learning about addiction, the cycle of addiction, the stages of change, and the stages of recovery. Once you get educated about how this all works and how we all participate in it, we can hopefully move forward, living a healthier, happier life and impacting the family to be a stronger, healthier unit.
That's amazing. And so I just want to say that you're going to be giving a workshop that does exactly that through Choose Love. So everybody that's listening, stay tuned for that. And I want to thank you so much for joining us, Donna. Hopefully this is the first of many things that we'll do together.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Donna.
You're welcome.
Hey, hey, oh. It's all part of us. We can all choose love. It'll lift you up.